News is your local school authority, and today, Massachusetts Education Secretary Dr. Patrick Tutwiler was in Hampshire County to hear from students and others from several districts when it comes to their budget concerns.
Western Mass News reporter Matt Price was at that event. He now joins us live from Northampton High School, where today's meeting was held, with more details for us. Matt, what can you tell us?
Amanda and Chris, that event taking place inside the auditorium here at Northampton High School. Students from across the county coming together to tell Secretary Tutwiler what changes they want to see.
These special activities help students focus on real-world problems, not just academics.
An important morning for several young people in Hampshire County who wanted Dr. Tutwiler to understand the challenges they're facing as their districts struggle to fund their education needs. Northampton Public Schools, one of 7 to have student representatives explain their situation.
The basic things that we're seeing include higher class sizes, cuts to educators and staff, loss of electives and AP classes, just a lot of things that are kind of making our education less well-rounded.
I think each counselor has to take care of over 200 students. That's not reasonable, and it's difficult for them to write proper recommendations and have individual sessions where instead we just have these big group sessions.
One by one, students and others explain their frustration with what they call flaws of Chapter 70, which is legislation aimed at funding education that makes sure there are minimum spending requirements for each school district, as well as to equitable and fair education. Among the other districts were Hadley Public Schools and Amherst Pelham Regional School District, as well as Hampshire Regional School District. Every representative asking for more funding for a wide range of matters, from transportation to special education. Secretary Tutwiler addressing everyone Tuesday morning.
What the administration has done is the things that are within its purview. The proposals around the 24% increase in circuit breaker funding, which brings it to the entitlement to 75% reimbursement. The increase in regional transportation reimbursement from 80% to 95%. I know it's not quite 100%, but we're getting there. These are things that are within our control and that have impact on districts.
Tutwiler also saying he and the Healy administration are willing partners should the legislature decide to open up Chapter 70 to see what changes can be made. Hampshire senior Elisa Colon Garcia, who aspires to be an educator herself, appreciated him listening to everyone's thoughts, but she wished to hear what action he will take.
I think that if we really do want change, we need to keep doing things like this, keep attending it, and keep having our voices heard, especially as being in Western Mass, we're muted compared to the bigger cities in Eastern.
We were unable to speak to Secretary Tutwiler today as he had to leave for another event. That said, the student representatives say they wish to continue the conversation and are hoping that something is done soon to mitigate damages they say are being seen in the school districts. Reporting live in Northampton, Matt Price, Western Mass News.